Thanks. Thank you so much. In my NUPE days, I was often referred to as the late Jeremy Corbyn, so I've kept up that reputation. So I'm sorry we're a bit late getting into the hall today. And I want to say thank you very, very much for inviting me here today. And I just say that last night I went to see former General Secretary Rodney Bickerstaff to wish him well, because as you know, he's been working with the NHS to improve his health. Let's put it that way. Can we just send Rodney a really big message of get well soon, Rodney? And it's a great pleasure to be back here in Brighton for the first time since the election. Not only did the Labour Party increase our majority in Hove from just over 1,000 to almost 19,000, but we also gained Brighton Kemp Town. And I was talking with members of the local party last night, and brilliant Lloyd Russell Mole overturned a Tory majority of almost 700 into a Labour majority of 10,000. The biggest majority that any MP of any party has ever held in that constituency. Well done, Brighton Labour. Well done, Russell. And here in the southeast, overall, Labour increased its vote by a fantastic 63%, a figure only beaten by the southwest of England, where we increased our vote by 73%. These are figures which show that there are no unwinnable seats for Labour now. We made gains at Canterbury and Kensington to our Labour heartlands in the north. And can I say how glad I am that numerous members of the new Parliament, Labour members of the new Parliament, are from UNISON, such as former Regional Secretary Eleanor Smith, and as Dave pointed out, MP for Wolverhampton South West, a black woman elected to the seat once held by Enoch Powell. And as somebody that grew up in the West Midlands and knew the poison of what Enoch Powell did and continued to do in that region, it's like a kind of cathartic process that you've been elected as the MP for Wolverhampton. I'm so pleased and so proud of you. Theresa May and the Tories are now weakened and divided. The Prime Minister called the election to win a landslide. She lost her majority and her political authority, and 2 weeks after the general election, she still hasn't been able to stitch together a deal with the DUP to stay in office. This is what you call strong and stable. While we have been strengthened across every part of the country in our drive to form a Labour government to deliver real change and transform people's lives, and although we did not win the general election, there is no question that it was a real advance and a success for the Labour Party and for working people all across the United Kingdom. I'm very proud of the result we achieved, but we've got to go a bit further. Against the predictions of the experts, that was achieved by putting our manifesto and our popular policies centre stage, a message of how the country could be if it was governed for the benefit of the many, not the few. And you know what? We, all of us in this hall, all of us in the party, all of us that campaigned, we showed that the politics of hope can and always will overcome the politics of fear that were being put forward by the other side. And this election created a movement of all the people, of all ages, all religions, all ethnicities and all backgrounds. Our strength is our unity. Our determination is to change this country for the better and to win the next election whenever it comes, as soon as it comes, to form a Labour government in Britain. None of this will be possible without the huge support that we get from the trade union movement and your members. Indeed, we would not be where we are today if it were not for the trade unions such as UNISON giving us fantastic support every step of the way. It's vital you get the recognition that you deserve for being the bedrock of our party, in the knowledge that it's only a Labour government and not a Tory government that will protect and deliver for all the members of UNISON wherever they are in the UK. During the election campaign, roughly half of all the money the Labour Party raised was from private individuals, giving on average £20 to £30 each, wanting to help our national campaign. And I'm very grateful to all those people that sent often quite small donations to our head office to help the campaign or to local parties because they wanted to see things done differently. They made a sacrifice that we might all help them to overcome the problems they face in their lives. The other half of our income came from trade unions. I don't apologise for that. Actually, I'm very proud of that, the support we've got from trade unions. Other parties rely on huge private donations and handouts from corporations. The Labour Party relies on smaller donations from ordinary people and the generosity of the democratic trade union movement to keep going and keep representing people and the concerns they have all over this country. But it's not only the financial contribution, it's also the practical help and participation, which I must thank the union for. The UNISON campaign, led by your General Secretary Dave Prentice and managed by Liz Snape and Lucy Hindley, gave a massive boost to the overall campaign. Whether it was articles and adverts in newspapers highlighting the need for care in our NHS and an end to the dangerous cuts in community policing, or if it was the social media campaign and Facebook advertising seen by over 8 million voters, or just your targeted campaign on the ground, knocking on doors, listening to people's concern and letting people know about how a Labour government would end Tory austerity to benefit them and their families. So my thanks to everybody from UNISON for all that you did to support our campaign, and for all I hope that you will continue to do to ensure that a Labour government is acknowledged by all clearly to be now within our reach. We're nearly there. Theresa May and the Tories are clinging to power by the skin of their teeth and at the pleasure of the Democratic Unionist Party. But Labour will oppose this weak Conservative minority government, both in Parliament and outside, every step of the way. And you could see the mood in Parliament when Parliament resumed this week. One side allegedly won the election and sat there with long, glum faces. The other side, the opposition, are the government in waiting, and that is exactly what we are. We are ready for another election at any time to finish the job of beating the failed, clapped-out Tories and form a government that works for all. The last week has shown how necessary it is to do this as soon as we can. The Grenfell Tower fire should never have happened. Every single one of those deaths could and should have been avoided. From Hillsborough to the child sex abuse scandal to Grenfell Tower, there's a very clear pattern. Working class voices are ignored by the powerful and their concerns are repeatedly dismissed. The Grenfell Tower residents themselves had raised concerns about the lack of fire safety in the block. The Grenfell Action Group had warned, and I quote, "It is a truly terrifying thought, but the Grenfell Action Group firmly believes that only a catastrophic event would expose the ineptitude and incompetence of our landlord. So not only should more have been done to prevent those tragic deaths, but the Prime Minister has now had to publicly apologise for her government's pitiful response in helping those that had lost their homes and lost their loved ones in that disaster. A tower block in flames due to poor building quality and heroic response by the fire and rescue service, who were dangerously overstretched and understaffed, and a government and a local government response that has left victims sleeping out for a few days under bridges as they had nowhere else to go. Make no mistake about it, this is the brutal reality of austerity economics that has failed in its own terms and leading to falling living standards, rising inequality and disasters. We've always known that austerity was a choice made by those at the top, which has harmed the lives of many to maintain the privileges of a few, but has had absolutely devastating and frankly inhumane consequences for those at the very bottom of our society. Of course, now the government offers warm words about the bravery of our firefighters and the commitment of our public sector workers who've worked round the clock to organise a response to Grenfell Fire and all the other recent attacks, including the one in my own constituency last Sunday night. Only this week, we've again seen the brilliant role by the emergency services in dealing with the terrible attack that I referred to in Finsbury Park, as well as the resilience and strength of our communities, who refuse to be divided and set against each other. But it's not good enough. It's not good enough to be grateful to our public sector workers only at moments of crisis and disaster. You deserve dignity at work, and the public deserves the dignity of well-funded public services. It's the police, the PCSOs, they're the ones who make our communities safer, and it is their knowledge of their communities and local intelligence gathering that helps prevent terrorism. Terrorism is not defeated by tearing up our human rights or by dividing our communities. It's defeated by our unity. There are now 20,000 fewer police officers than there were when the Tories took office in 2010. When the Police Federation raised this with Theresa May, that was when she was Theresa May Home Secretary, she accused them of crying wolf. It is this attitude, the same attitude that we always see when this government dismisses unions such as UNISON, when you raise concerns about the brutality of austerity and the dangers of public sector cuts that have left us in the position we're now in. This is why Labour's manifesto for the recent election, for the many, not the few, committed us to a fresh approach. 10,000 more police officers to work on community beats under a Labour government, equivalent to an extra officer for every neighbourhood in the country. Whereas the Conservatives have cut staffing, the number of firefighters, and closed dozens of fire stations, Labour would recruit 3,000 more firefighters. This is the only way to keep the people safe and ensure that current firefighters are not demeaned by being run into the ground with physical and mental exhaustion by excessive shifts as they're brought into one disaster after another. But this is the investment that Britain needs. Investment, yes, to create jobs and give people opportunities, but also essential investment to keep people safe in their homes. You cannot protect people's lives on the cheap. You only need to do, not only do we need to do spend more money on vital public services, but we need more money to be spent on vital public service workers as well. So, a Labour government will scrap the public sector pay cap. It is a disgrace. It is a disgrace that the National Health Service nurses are paid 14% less today in real terms than they were in 2010. In Britain, in 2017, we have nurses and other public sector workers being forced to go to food banks, along with 1 million other people whose chances have been crushed in the name of austerity. When this was put to the Prime Minister, she said there are complex reasons for people having to use food banks. Well, I hope the Prime Minister is listening today when I say there are not complex reasons for people having to use food banks. The only reason is that this government refuses to ensure that people have enough income to feed themselves. So ending the pay cap is a necessity. And our manifesto, fully costed, set this out, how new spending commitments would be paid for by asking the top 5%, top 5%, and I hope there's a socialist comrade behind me that's going to pass me a glass of water in a moment, in order that I can continue this description of the inequalities in our world. Thank you so much. Thank you. We're asking those top 5% to pay a small amount extra in tax, and they would still have a lower tax rate than most of them did, even under Margaret Thatcher's reign. That's how far we've gone on this kind of economics. And by asking big business to pay a little more, but still lower than the rate of any other country in the G7. More funding would then be available for our children's schools, where head teachers wouldn't have to collect to pay salaries, and for our National Health Service, this country's proudest achievement, as well as its most socialist one, offering universal health care for all on the basis of need, free at the point of use. This is a sacred principle for the overwhelming majority of people in this country, but it's one that the Tories have seriously put under threat through chronic defunding and creeping, well, almost galloping in some cases, privatisation through our hospitals. We're committed to ending this. We will halt the dreaded and much derided sustainability and transformation plans. We would instead put over 30 billion in extra funding over the course of a 5-year parliament. That is absolutely essential to ensure that NHS staff have the conditions which they deserve and everyone has the NHS services they deserve and I believe are entitled to. We would protect people by introducing legislation and imposing legal requirements for minimum staff levels in the NHS. Many NHS staff, and all of you in this room that work in the NHS will, I'm sure, relate to this, often work way past their finishing time in order to make sure a patient is safe, somebody is settled, or somebody has got a leaving arrangement so they can go into care if that's what's necessary. It's that dedication which actually becomes almost a form of moral blackmail against the staff. What we need is properly staffed hospitals and a fully functioning NHS and social care system. And we are committed to the reintroduction of the nurses' bursary scheme and funding health-related degrees. So that we encourage more people to train. I was talking to a group of trainee nurses in the NHS during the election campaign. And I asked every one of them, if the nurse bursary scheme had not been available, would you now be becoming an NHS nurse? And of the 10 I talked to, only one thought she possibly could if she could find somebody to lend her the money to get through the course. Well, that is no way to run a National Health Service. If we want a good National Health Service and we want the nurses we need, then we've got to train them and be proud to do it as well, and we will. We will also immediately guarantee the rights of European Union nationals, protecting the tens of thousands of them working in our health and social care sector. And I have to say, I was very proud of the UNISON journal that had whole pages and pages describing the work that EU nationals do who are members of our union, part of our community and contributing to our society. Brilliantly put. Thank you to all of them, and thank you to all NHS workers for what you do every single day of the week. Yesterday, the Prime Minister put down her first offer in Brussels on the rights of EU nationals after Brexit. But as our shadow Brexit Secretary Keir Starmer has said, people should not be used as bargaining chips in the Brexit negotiations. And what she has floated falls far short of the full guarantee Labour would make. This isn't just the right thing to do, it's also the best way to guarantee the rights of British nationals living all across Europe as well. So, just as the 1945 Labour government created the National Health Service out of post-war ruin, the next Labour government will lay the foundations for a national care service in the aftermath of the ruinous austerity of the Conservatives. We will ensure that all care workers are paid a real living wage reaching £10 an hour by 2020. Improving social care is so essential in providing dignity in old age and giving independence to those who are vulnerable or of a disability or a mental health condition. Only a universal approach will be sufficient to tackle the problem. The election showed the Tories for what they really are, how they desire to introduce a dementia tax to take people's homes away from them purely because they have the misfortune to having to rely on social care. I just think that's wrong. Losing so many seats in the general election has forced the Conservatives into abandoning their social care plans, abandoning their plans to bring back grammar schools and to scrap free school meals for those children that get them at the moment. The election showed the public is with us. People know from their experience that privatisation has failed, that austerity has failed, that it has damaged services and held people back. The Labour Party and the entire Labour movement exists so that working people's voices are heard. I'm proud to be a UNISON member, and I worked as an organiser. UNISON does excellent work representing public service workers, ensuring your voice is heard on cuts, austerity, workplace rights, pay and public services. The government is dropping so many of their proposals, shows they've heard us, and now the Conservatives need to hear us on declining living standards, falling wages, public service cuts from the NHS to schools to social care. But if this election with increased turnout was about people's voices being heard, we must ensure that the next election is people's cheers of hope. Hope for the better society that is possible. Hope for the better country we could be. Hope for a Labour government that will bring equality, opportunity and prosperity. Together we can make that happen. The Labour Party and the Labour movement, united for the many, not for the few. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Be of good cheer. Election will come soon and we'll win, all right? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeremy. Conference. Jeremy has kindly or bravely agreed to accept questions. All regions and self-organised groups have submitted questions and a number have been randomly selected. I will ask those regions selected to ask their questions one at a time, please. Thank you.
Chair, Conference, Jeremy. Sinead Liddy on behalf of the National Young Members Forum. Thanks to my fan club. First, can I say, Jeremy, thank you for leading such an inspiring campaign in the general election. It was amazing to see young people again so energised by politics. And now to my question. UNISON's young members welcome the commitment in the manifesto for the many, not the few, on the living wage. It promised a living wage of £10 an hour for all workers aged 18 and over. However, if someone's working at the age of 16 and entitled to vote, as also proposed in the manifesto, shouldn't they be paid the rate for the job, or a minimum wage of £10 per hour? Shouldn't 16-year-olds be equal when it comes to living wage? Thank you.
First of all, thanks for your question and your remarks about the election campaign. And I'll say something about that first. It was quite incredible campaign in that so many in the media had decided in all their cynical calculations that the game was over and Theresa May was waltzing back in with an increased majority. Well, it didn't quite work out like that, did it? But what was incredible was the numbers of people from all walks of life who came forward to join in our campaign and that incredible enthusiasm that was there. I have many, many memories of the election campaign. I did 100 events during the campaign all over the country. And all of them were interesting and all of them remarkable and all of them of great cheer, but the most incredible was 10,000 people on the beach at West Kirby in the Wirral on a Saturday afternoon. I thought you were over there. And we had to end it in time for the tide to come in, otherwise there'd have been problems. On your point, you're absolutely right. Yes, a £10 an hour living wage, real living wage is correct, but also it should apply to all workers because I don't think young people eat less than older people. That's my experience anyway. So thank you very much for your question, and thank you for what you do for young people within the union, because we do need to ensure that the message of union membership gets out to young people as well, and I think we should use the enthusiasm that the general election campaign created and brought so many very excited young people into politics for the first time, to stay involved, of course, but also to join unions wherever they are, so we have a much stronger trade union movement in the future. That can be built through the young members of today. Thank you very much for your question.
Next question, please.
Morning, Jeremy. Linda Hobson from the Northern Region. And thank you. That's for me, not for Jeremy. Thank you. And our question is, how can we make sure that we build on the success of the general election campaign so that we not only see more people returning to the Labour Party and perhaps voting for the Labour Party for the first time, but that we make sure that people who are still feeling disenfranchised from the political system actually we get them to register and use their vote to vote Labour and to return Jeremy Corbyn as Prime Minister.
Thanks, Linda, and thanks for the incredible work done in the Northern Region in the election campaign and gaining Stockton in the general election, and the incredible numbers of people that turned out in the rain at the Sage in Gateshead in the last week of the campaign. And it was the amazing unity was achieved. Newcastle and Gateshead came together to support Labour, and it was quite incredible. We did a big effort on voter registration, both from the Labour Party, from trade unions, and from lots of independent groups all over the country, and almost 2 million more people registered to vote than had been registered before the election campaign started. And all the indications are they overwhelmingly came to support Labour in the election, particularly young people. And I must say it was quite incredible seeing young people going into vote who'd clearly never voted before, weren't entirely sure what to do, and were sort of rather timidly saying, what do I do now I'm here? Fantastic. They joined in. they campaigned and they supported. But of course we have to keep people involved and active for the future. So it isn't just about campaigning in the 5 or 6 weeks of an election, it's also all the campaigning we do at every other time. And the support we achieved through social media as well as through all the traditional leafleting and campaigning methods is very important, and I want to build on that. But the campaign's to be mounted. The housing crisis that's facing so many people in this country has to be addressed. Grenfell Tower fire has exposed just how dangerous many people's lives are. We need a campaign not just on fire safety, but also on a campaign to ensure that the government invests in the necessary council, housing association housing, so that the housing lists can be reduced, so that homelessness can become a thing of the past, and that we as a country are properly housed. That is a great campaign we have to mount. Next weekend, there's anti-austerity activities. It's all of these campaigns all of the time, not just in the election period, that raise the consciousness and understanding of people that things can be done differently. And that means also the Labour Party reaching out at local levels on issues of health service cuts and funding, of issues of the needs of social care. Because actually what drives change in politics is activity on the ground that goes all the way through the system and eventually ends up in great change. I think our manifesto was transformational in lots of ways, and it caught a resonance that I've never seen before in any election manifesto because of its clarity, because of its simplicity, and because of its completeness. And I'm very proud of the document we put forward. And so we've got to keep up all that campaigning work, challenge them on austerity, challenge them on housing, challenge them on health, but also challenge them on the need for investing in the future. Too many of our young people are in insecure jobs, on 0 hours contracts, insecure, lacking rights at work, all those issues that we put in the manifesto. I want all those people that are on insecure working conditions at the moment to vote Labour in the future, because we will offer them something very, very different. But when we do things together, we're so much stronger. So I do invite UNISON branches to also work closely with local Labour Party campaigns and all the other social campaigns that go on around hospitals and other issues, because that is what brings us all together. The Labour Party was a creation essentially by the trade union movement, and we now have well over 500,000 individual members, as well as, of course, more than 3 million affiliated members through trade unions. That's a pretty big force in our society. We can change an awful lot of things. It's having the confidence of the way the world could be, the confidence that we can stand up for rights and justice, not just here, but around the world, the confidence that things can be done differently. So join in the campaigns, be out there and doing it. And you know what? People doing things together dream of the impossible becomes the reality. Staying at home as a cyber warrior on your keyboard or shouting at your television won't necessarily change that much. Going out there and doing things does.
Vice President, Conference, Peter Crews, Cymru Wales. You've made many commitments today, and the Labour manifesto has many commitments in it, which I think this conference would say that's exactly what we've been waiting for. But our question to you, what are your top 2 priorities that you would like to see implemented when you become our Prime Minister, and within what time scale?
There are so many priorities I'd put forward, but essentially the first one has to be to challenge the whole economic narrative that we've had in this country for so long. The idea that you continue rolling back on the role of the public service in all areas of life somehow or other makes people better off. The reality is it has not done that at all. What's happened is a growing and increasing gap between the richest and the poorest as tax relief is given to the biggest businesses and the wealthiest people, and the underfunding of services affects the poorest the most, but actually affects people all over the country, because we all need fire service, ambulance services and everything else. So the first and absolute priority is a change in the economic direction, and we'd introduce an immediate budget to start that process of properly funding our public services. And I've no doubt that we would receive a lot of opposition in doing this, but that is what we're here for. We're here for a process that democratically delivers what the people of this country are wanting. When you say the priorities beyond that, well, there are so many, but if I may stretch your point a little bit and say there would be 3 areas I'd want to put resources into immediately to deal with it. The first one is the housing crisis. I feel very passionately about the need for everyone to have somewhere decent to live within our society. Because children growing up in insecure private rented accommodation, not knowing how long they're going to be there, are stressed, likely to achieve less in school, may have to move. Not right, not necessary. They need that security. So investment in housing is a very strong priority for me. The second is properly funding health and social care, because it's not right that 1 million people are waiting for social care and not getting it. It's not right that so many NHS workers are so overstretched, as I said in my contribution a few minutes ago. And the third area is on education. I know many teachers, I talk to them very often, I visit schools all the time because I find it fascinating and inspiring talking to students as well as the teachers there. But they're incredibly stressed. The teaching assistants incredibly stressed. The whole school is very stressed. And I value all those who work in schools. Teachers, teaching assistants, head teachers, catering workers, cleaners, admin staff. They're part of a team. And so when the government talks glibly about sort of cutting back office staff as though it doesn't have any implications for the running of the whole service, I say look again at the needs of education and look again at the needs of our children. So I was very proud that our manifesto included a commitment to free school meals for all primary school children, that included a commitment to 30 hours free childcare and support for children from age 2 to 4, and very proud that we'll bring back the EMA and will also abolish student fees so that everyone can go to university if they're able to get in there.
Vice President Conference, Jeremy. Our question, my name's Yvonne Green from Greater London Region and also from Croydon, where we got rid of Gavin Barwell. Yeah. Jeremy, it's still early days. Well, no comment. Jeremy, it's still early days and we do not know fully what went so hideously wrong, but it appears that ignoring the views of tenants was a key reason for Grenfell. Isn't the best way for tenants to be safe if they are given proper powers to protect themselves? Thank you.
It's absolutely right that the tenants in Grenfell Tower had been concerned for a very long time about the safety of that block. And after that fire, we all know people living in tower blocks. Indeed, some in this hall may be living in tower blocks themselves. You're all worried. You're bound to be. Because you know there's no turntable ladder that can reach the top of a tower. You know in the event of a towering inferno such as that, there's no helicopter that's going to get people to safety. You rely completely on fire protection and fire safety measures that have got to be effective, efficient, and work. If you cut local authority expenditure, the inspections may be cut. If you have fewer environmental health officers, there's likely to be less efficient inspection and protection. If you have fewer people doing all those checks, if you have fewer people working on building control and on planning, then you end up with some very dangerous situations indeed. And so there's been now this very urgent inspection of tower blocks all over the country, and a number have been found to have dangerous cladding on them, which obviously must be removed immediately. The question of the sprinkler systems that was advised after the Lacknell House fire has largely not been acted on. Sprinkler systems could help to save a lot of life and protect people. But it's also, you're quite right, it's about the voice of tenants. And I think it's very important that there be a statutory right of tenants to be represented to their landlord, be it the local authority, a housing association, or a private sector landlord, so their voice is heard. You need to empower people. We want to be empowered at the workplace in order to be represented, to raise our issues with employers of concerns on wages, conditions, safety, all those issues. That is exactly what trade unions do all the time. Surely we need the same right of representation outside our working lives, in our housing conditions and within our communities. And so I would look at a comprehensive piece of housing legislation that deals with the housing needs of the country, but crucially also deals with the rights of tenants and residents of leasehold property to ensure that their views are properly represented. Because in reality, you all know this, if you've got an efficient trade union organisation in any workplace, it actually works better. Management is better, management is more on point because they know they're going to be challenged if they're not, and actually it becomes a plus all round. And so I absolutely thank you for your question, thank you for what you've done in Croydon, and this tragedy, and it is a tragedy, wholly preventable tragedy of Grenfell Tower, surely has got to be a warning lesson to all of us. You cut at your peril, you ignore safety at your peril. We're there to hold this government to account, but above all, we're there to be the government that will be willingly held to account to make sure we do achieve everything that we set out in our manifesto in the election.
Good morning, Vice President Conference, Jeremy. Manjola Kamari from the West Midlands region and also a member of the National Black Members Committee. Before I ask you the question, I'm one of the proud constituents who Eleanor Smith will be representing in Wolverhampton. So happy with that. Jeremy, my question is, will the Labour Party work to guarantee that none of the current equality protections we have under EU law will be revoked during the exiting of the EU as part of these negotiations?
Absolutely, we will protect. Absolutely, we'll protect all those equality provisions that are there from EU law, and make sure they're enshrined in UK law, and that we would work with European countries in the future to ensure that where there are improvements, we can learn from them. We would also go further than that and properly fund the Equalities and Human Rights Commission, because at the moment it is woefully underfunded, and because it's so woefully underfunded, there are real problems that many people simply do not get the representation they should. If we're against, as we are, discrimination on the grounds of race, on the grounds of disability, or the grounds of age, or the grounds of gender, that's obviously all there in legislation. If the machinery is not there and the appeal system is not there to deal with those issues, then those laws become less meaningful. I want to make sure that we properly fund those rights of representation. And by the way, we would end any notion of tribunal charges for people going to an employment tribunal as well.
Good morning, Chair, Conference, Jeremy. Margot Cranmer, Lanarkshire Health Branch and the Scottish Region Representative on the National Nursing and Midwifery Occupational Group. Jeremy, my question is, Labour's committed to reinstate the student nurse bursary. Would you agree with UNISON that to pay a minimum of the living wage is a better option?
We'll obviously bring back the nurse bursary, but which will ensure that the training can take place. The point you're making is what, to an alternate system? Listen, can I look into that? I can't give you the complete answer on this. What I want is the nurse bursary brought back so that everyone can get the training they need and want, and they won't be unable to do it because of their levels of income. Obviously, there are issues about pay of people in work, particularly as trainee nurses, who should be properly paid, and that's where the living wage will kick in. And I would want to see no undercutting and exploitation of trainees, or indeed in the wider sense of apprentices either, by underpaying them. And so the nurse bursary is is there to ensure the training is available and the fees are paid. The proper wages should be paid for any work that they do at the same time.
Vice President, Conference. Ken Curran, Sheffield Metropolitan Branch and Chair of the Yorkshire and Humberside UNISON Labour Link Committee. Jeremy, the public sector pay freeze has hit people hard. For 7 years we've been worse off each year as prices have been rising. What would an incoming Labour government do to help people like me and many others make ends meet?
You're quite right. The public sector pay freeze has in effect meant a pay cut because obviously there's been some inflation. And the figure I gave of 14% in the NHS is also there in local government and in other public services, and is completely wrong. And so we would lift the pay cap, and that would mean there would then be a return to normal negotiations between the employers and the unions on what the pay level should be in the future, and that we would properly fund local government and the health service in order to pay for that as well. We cannot go on expecting public sector workers to pay the brunt of the price of austerity, whilst at the other end of the scale there's been increasing tax relief and tax giveaways to the richest. I admire the work that public sector workers do, but it cannot be right that year on year they're just seeing living standards fall, workload increase, responsibilities increase, and you'd know better than me as people at the workplace or representing people at the workplace, the levels of stress that are involved in public sector workers at the moment is absolutely horrendous. Yes, I want a properly funded mental health service in the whole country, we all do, but I also want to reduce the levels of stress that bring about those mental health crises later on because of the conditions under which some people are forced to work. And so we lift the pay cap, fund public services properly, and ensure that there is proper representation at all levels in the workplace. And you know what? We'd all be better off as a result of that.
Thank you, Jeremy. As you've heard from the conference, we are all right behind you. And as Dave has said, we hope that the next time you're addressing us, it will be as our Prime Minister.
My handwriting is terrible. It might get better
No, you've been absolutely great. You're taking me out of the back door, and I think there'll be more thanks to my friend and do this.
Thank you very much. See you on the campaign trail. Thank you.